Hello, Shirley Adams here. Suits Me to a T is program number 8 in the series. Nothing is more comfortable to wear than a t-shirt, and its simple pattern can assume a multitude of tee, sweat, or sweater looks. But it can also change into a wealth of other garments with the greatest of ease. Let's analyze it to see what magic it holds. Now usually the pattern front and back are identical, except as I hold the two of them here, notice how the front neck is cut about an inch lower on this pattern. Maybe your pattern it might even be as much as 2 inches lower, which doesn't matter. It's all sort of the same thing. Notice also something that's nice about today's tees. Now they change from time to time, but today there will be on most of the patterns a notch right about here. And this is going to be your shoulder point, and anything beyond there is going to hang off your shoulder. And that's because right now things are drop shoulders and the sleeves go on from there, or sleeveless as you prefer. But the front and the back are identical, so that makes it nice. Now I use this t-shirt pattern so much that what I've done is fuse some non-woven interfacing to the back of it so that it won't disintegrate as the tissue alone would. So do that with any pattern that you're going to use a great deal. Well, this can do a whole lot of things besides t-shirts, but first here hanging on the rack I do have just a t-shirt. I have made a slight change in this one, made it into a two-piece dress here. I traced some of the skirt design on Wonder Under and fused some solid flowers up here. But as I put my pattern on, you can see that the only difference I made, I cut the sleeve just a tad longer here, and right here at the center front, notice how the neck is lower. Well, that's an easy matter. I initially just cut out this white t-shirt, the very same as the pattern, and then later I cut it down a little bit and put the binding on. So that's a very simple change that you can make. Now this that I have next here on the rack isn't even a t-shirt. This is a blouse, it's linen. And same t-shirt pattern, no changes made. The only thing that I did that was different is decorated a little bit. I cut a doily in half here and put it on, and then I did something with twin needle stitching here. Now if you've never done the twin needle stitching, it's a fun thing to do. I won't even bother to demonstrate it because it is very easy. Any machine that's capable of doing a zigzag stitch, therefore has a wide throat plate, is going to work all right with this twin needle. And it looks like this. You can get them in any fabric shop or sewing machine shop. There are just 2 needles on 1 shank. You use 2 spools of thread with this and do this twin needle pin tucking that I've done tracing around that doily. So it's an easy thing to do, but I'm going to do a little other decoration here that you might also want to think of doing. I'll just use a sample of fabric, and anytime you do some decorative stitching, which I'm going to be doing right now, anytime you do, it's a good idea to perhaps put some stabilizer under the fabric so that it won't wrinkle up and pucker up. So try it with or without on a scrap before you do it on your project to see what's going to happen. Well, what I'm using here is a foot that has several little holes in it, and I've threaded pearl cotton through those holes with the needle threader. And what I've done before I started, after I had a lot of this in about 7 different colors of thread of pearl cotton, what I've done then on the back after I got it all threaded is tie a knot right away, or they would pull out so easily and I'd have to re-thread them. So get yourself a long length, and then I'll just stitch and show you how you can decorate something very well with this. But also notice it gives kind of the look of the twin needle pin tucking in that it's decorative. Now I don't have to straighten out these threads as I go along. The little foot will do that for me. So I'm just going to do a little stitching over there and then show you what it looks like. You can, if you want to, turn this in circles, and the foot will just take the yarns right with you, so you don't have to control any of that. And it's a fun thing to dial several decorative stitches to see exactly what will result. I'll just move this down and move it over with the other so that you can see what it looks like. So this is just another decorative thing that you might do on a blouse, a t-shirt. Isn't that fun to do? You can also do some stitching like that over decorative ribbons. Try a little ingenuity of your own. Here's another blouse I'd like to show you, and it's sort of the same idea. It's also a linen blouse, and what I've done with this is a little faggoting. Now frankly what I did is used up a little extra fabric too, and as I made this blouse, same t-shirt pattern, but as I made this I didn't have a whole lot of any of these fabrics, so what I had to do is make a bigger fabric. So first I built the fabric. I just did some of this faggoting that I'm going to show you and made the fabric larger. Then I put the pattern on and cut it out afterwards. And it's the same t-shirt pattern, I just cut a V-neck in this one. So nothing very different about it because that same pattern is such magic. Well, the way you do that faggoting by a little TV magic, I've changed now to a different setting on the machine and I'm going to show you how to do it. You surely have some foot on your machine that will do this, and what it is a little raised spot, and I've dialed a stitch that's going to go not only zigzag, but it's going to go back and forth. It's kind of like a stretch stitch that you surely have. And see how it goes back and forth as well as zigzagging? Now what that's going to do with the little raised spot in the foot is make that stitching very baggy up here. It can be used for such things as tailor's tacks if you want to do those by machine. But I'm doing it for a different purpose this time because everything is usually multi-purpose. And then after you get enough of that, which I probably have now to show you what it looks like, and after I pull it apart here, see how that thread on the top is just loose? It looks like something was wrong with the tension. Well, nothing was wrong. It's just that I had used that foot that did that process. Then when I open this seam and pull it open, notice how I'll put it down here so you can see it better, perhaps with a lighter background. But notice how it gives, or maybe I can put it on the blouse here to show, notice how as I pull this apart, and I would press it then, and I would possibly do some top stitching on both sides to keep it that way, which is what I have done on the blouse. But it gives that effect that you see so much of today. So many designers are doing that, so many manufacturers. So this is how they do it, or a machine similar anyway. So you can do the same thing. Anything that you see in fashion magazines or in the store, you can do some way. Another t-shirt that I have up here has been cut up, and now this is the only time I'm going to bother to cut up a pattern. It's when it's something like this with all these wavy lines on it. Now there's no way I can use that standard pattern for this. So what I first must do to make this is cut a duplicate. I'm never going to cut out that magic pattern. I'm instead going to make a duplicate like this, and I have two of them taped together in the middle. I have two fronts here. And I'm going to draw whatever lines I want. I see that on this t-shirt I did them sort of like this, and then one over here. And I'm going to do a little hash mark in a couple of places. And then when I cut these apart, what those hash marks do is form notches. Anytime you cut a pattern apart like this, you of course have to add seam allowances when you cut it in fabric. So as I'd cut this then in fabric, I'd add a 5/8 seam allowance, and if you can't remember, pin the pattern down to your fabric. And if you can't remember, you need 5/8, or if you can't eyeball 5/8, do put some pins there, take a marker and draw on your fabric exactly where the 5/8 line is, draw that with your little seam gauge. And any place you come to a hash mark, add a little notch there and add a little notch here, so that when you cut out this second piece of a different color fabric, do the same thing. You're going to add a seam allowance to it and put a notch there and put a notch here. Then when you stitch the two together again, you know exactly how to stitch them because those notches are there. So it's not a hard job at all. But anytime you cut up something like this with curvy lines, you are going to have to make a duplicate pattern and take care of it that way. Now this is the only time I'd cut up that pattern. Other than that, I simply put my pattern down on fabric and use it as is. The t-shirt that I'm wearing, the pink one, the solid pink one, here's how I cut this one out. It has a boat neck out here, and it sort of droops a little bit, almost like a cowl neck. It comes out about so far, but it has also on the inside a facing. This is just a cut-on facing. It's all cut in one piece. I didn't do anything with the pattern. All I did when I was cutting this out is fold the top of the fabric down. Now here's the fold of the fabric, and I have an abbreviated piece here. It isn't the whole thing. But here's a fold of fabric here, and I want another fold across the top. The two raw edges are up here, and I'm just going to fold this down about 2 inches. And then when I put my pattern on that fold, I'm going to put it not so that it all goes on the fabric, but I'm going to put it up a little bit because I want that boat neck line to come out about 2 inches wider on my neck than it does. And then I'd cut this out like so. I would not. Don't do that. Don't you make that same mistake. I'm going to do this again because I didn't mean to do that. So we sometimes do make mistakes. And if you do, be prepared with a little extra fabric than what you thought you needed in the first place. Okay, I'm starting over again. I'm going to have to fold this down because all I want to cut on this is the shoulder seam, nothing else. So I'm just going to cut this shoulder seam like so. Do you think I did that purposely just to tell you what you could do? Well, you'll never know, will you? I'm not going to tell you. Okay, so here's the throwaway, and here's what I have left. Here's that facing down here that will just go into it nicely. It's elongated here. I don't need that much. So I'd cut this off. I'd finish this edge first with zigzag or serger or whatever, and then I would be ready to just go ahead and make the shoulder seams, finish up the t-shirt. Very simply. So you can do this without buying any special patterns. You just use your magic t-shirt pattern for all of these things. Here's another one. This is a top that I wear belted over a skirt. It's an over blouse. But notice with this, it has not a center fold as the t-shirts do, but it actually has an opening, and that opening comes way over here and around. The way I did this was, again, not do anything different to my pattern. I simply put it on my fabric, which I'll spread some fabric out here, and instead of putting this center front of the pattern right on the center front fold, I decided that what I wanted was to have this jacket, this opening coming way out over here. So when I cut it out, I just cut it out like this and back again. And this is what made that opening, and this is what made the big lapel that I have buttoned down here. So isn't that simple? You don't have to use a different pattern. When this was basically a t-shirt and just changed a little bit, there was no reason why it couldn't be used as is. I also cut these shoulders down a little bit longer for longer sleeves, and then they kind of stuck out funny. Well, this is where you use some designer innovation, so I simply made a little pleat here. I just brought the fabric together in the middle and stitched that down for a little pleat. It makes both a nice designer detail, but as well as that, it made the sleeve look better on my body since it came in a little tighter. So another very simple change. This one is similar in that it's not cut down, or it's not cut on the fold. It is cut down the front, and I did something similar there. I just put the pattern over here when I cut it out, and I'll put this down here. Get this closer to the pattern so you can see it. I wanted it to overlap, so I did do this little V-neck here, and then I just cut it on out here wider so that it would overlap and do this closing, this front closing. Then what I did here to the edge is simply add a band of fabric to the end of the t-shirt line here. So again, an easy change that you can do. Look through those magazines and see what you can find there. Here is what I found in the shop, an expensive blouse, and it had this little knot here tied in the sleeve, and I thought, gee, that's interesting, and I wonder what it is. Well, it was silky fabric, and as I was holding it, honest, I didn't do it, it just fell open in my hand. And so what I saw was this. And I noticed, my goodness, this is nothing for all that money. This is nothing but a t-shirt pattern. And here I'll turn my pattern over so you can see how it fits on this. There it is, the same t-shirt pattern. All I have done to this is add this little wing up here, which is a very simple thing. Just figure out how much extra you want. Oh, this has about 5 inches here at the bottom, and it extends up here considerably, but see how it's this wing. And then when I stitched it together, I simply stitched the shoulder seams as far as they were supposed to be in the first place, left the rest of it open and hemmed it all, and then it ties in this nice little knot. So for very few bucks, I could imitate something with big bucks. You might also extend the sleeves. And on this blouse, I not only extended the sleeves, but I also built up a collar. Now this is also just as simple. To extend these sleeves, it's the same t-shirt pattern. I did, when I cut this out, add that extra on the front, so I cut it out here extra wide so that I could have a closing there. And then I simply kept cutting this. I just cut it out to sort of a slim wrist. Measure your wrist first. See how much it's going to take on the tape measure to get your hand through so that you can put it on. And I simply cut it out long enough from my shoulder down to my wrist is what I measured here. That long, I made this the same length. and I've got this blouse. Also, I cut it off here and added a band, but that's a simple thing to do. This tie bow that I have here is nothing but a straight piece of fabric. It's about 60 inches long, and it's just a straight piece of fabric that I cut. So, a simple thing that you can do and simulate whatever it is you see. This jacket also is made just from a t-shirt pattern. You can see that the original t-shirt, I did make the little extra here in front for an opening. And it has a yoke on it, but it is the same t-shirt pattern. But with this yoke, what I did was fold the pattern down and I cut the lower part of it up to here, plus remember, 5/8 of an inch. You have to have seam allowances there. So I cut that part, and then I cut separately this top part. I simply, well, maybe I want to put it like this and lift it up. This top part, the yoke part, I just lifted this up, folded it back, added the seam allowance, and cut those yokes back and front. With some quilting like this mock trapunto quilting, you can do it so easily, very quickly, without doing any drawing on it at all. If you will just stitch off big blocks. I'd stitch off this block, then I'd stitch off this block, and then just use the presser foot going round and round or up and down or whatever, just mindless stitching, just while your care is away as you're stitching this, and do some pretty quilting that would cost a whole lot more if you would buy that than what you can make it for. Here's a beach cover-up, same t-shirt pattern, it's just pure gold. It can be used repeatedly. So with this t-shirt pattern, I did just cut the front opening there and then added the band instead of adding an overlap, but I also just folded this over as I was cutting it so that it would come down to a V. And then again, added on here. How much I added here, I think depended on the size of the fabric. Sometimes you don't make long sleeves if your fabric isn't long enough. So this was cut off, probably somewhere around here, because that's all the fabric there was. So it's fine, you don't need long sleeves in a beach cover-up. It's going to be a warm day, hopefully. This band is nothing but a straight piece that you cut. Just measure your beach coat that goes around the neck from the bottom, around the neck to the other bottom, and add that. Everything else just has turned under hems, everything's top stitched, but very simple, something you can do very nicely with that same t-shirt pattern. So my beach coat, and going the opposite end, I have a coat here, but first, while this fabric is still on the table, I want to show you something else you can do with this. I already told you on a former show that I'm shortly going to have another granddaughter or grandson. I don't know about this one. But this t-shirt pattern also is just terrific for maternity tops. The back I'm going to leave as is. I'm just going to cut out that back t-shirt pattern without any changes, maybe add a little bit of flare. But for the front, you don't want to, if you want some increased width in here, you don't just want to add out on the side here, because remember, wherever you add to something is where it's going to show. There's no sense in having this flare out on the side. Where you're going to need it is in the center front for a maternity top. So using this very same pattern, this is what I'm going to do. It's on the fold right now, and I'm just going to move it like this. And I'm going to decide how many extra inches I want in that front and move it accordingly. I might move it so far that this slanted shoulder becomes a straight line here, which is fine. For those of you who always worry about fabric grain, the fabric grain is still straight up and down the center front. Nothing has changed there. All I have done is add extra fullness to the front. Also with this, I would check on the length. I'd probably look in the pattern book where they always have in the patterns the length of it, the width of it. I'd probably check in the maternity section for this and see how much width they have around the bottom in most of the outfits and how much length they have, and do something accordingly so that it works out right. But very often you find the fit is just fine everywhere else. It's only in the front where you need it, so that's a good place to add it. Now if I wanted to have some pleats in front, which is another possibility, instead of flaring it like that, I might just move it away from the center front and go ahead and cut it this way and pleat all this up in the center. Then after I have it cut out, I would pleat it up until it was the right size to fit the pattern, and then just put some sort of a band, whatever, around the neck to hold those pleats in place. So again, very easy changes from this. Isn't this fun? You might originally or initially want to cut up a pattern and add the extra to it, or add that onto this pattern. You might want to do that initially until you become so comfortable with it that you find that, gee, I can do that pretty nicely, pretty well, without even doing that intermediate step. The other opposite. Oh, I didn't tell you about what I have before I get to winter here. I'm still wearing summer, so let me tell you about this. The under t-shirt I told you about, the way I cut that boat neck. But this over one, it is again just the t-shirt pattern. Now it does have a facing here. The way I got that facing was to fold this back. I'll do it maybe on the other side so that I have the raw edges here. I just folded this back for a facing. And remember, that facing's not going to come straight up. It's probably going to come on around to your shoulder seam. So I folded this fabric back enough that when I put the pattern on it, I will have plenty here to come both up the front and around the shoulder. I don't have quite enough. I'm going to move it over again slightly, because when I cut this, what I really want is an overlap. I've got buttons and buttonholes here. That means I need an overlap. That's called an extension. From the center of your button, which is always on the center front, to the edge here under where the fold back goes for the facing, that's called the extension. And that extension depends on the size of your button. Well, usually for things like this, that button isn't more than 1/2 inch, 5/8. So that's how much of an extension that you'd add here. Therefore, I'm going to put my pattern like this. I'll just add that 5/8 inch extension. I'm eyeballing it, but if I put my little measure, it's exactly 5/8. When you get a little experience, you can see anything under 1 inch, can't you? Very easily, you know what's 7/8, 6/8, and so on. So I've added this over here. I would then just go ahead and cut it out, because if I'd cut around the neck and straight over and cut down the shoulder, I already have this nice facing here. All I would do after I have the whole thing cut out then is take off a little bit of this facing. Not at the neck, you need it here to come on the shoulder, but I'd taper it down here a little bit. What else I did with this one is cut the sleeves extra long. I just put a tape measure on my shoulder, because we know that this little notch that's here, that's the shoulder point. So I put a tape measure on my shoulder to measure down to how long I wanted this sleeve. But notice I have this little fold up here. So I probably added about 13 inches. So from that notch right here down to here, 13 inches is what I added to this. After I had the whole top made, that's when I just pinched up a fold. After I stood at the mirror and had it on my body, I pinched up this fold, I put a pin there, and then went to the machine and just did some top stitching to make this. So again, an easy change that you can make. Now this winter coat that I've been going to get to about 3 times, let me show you that. T-shirt, can you believe? Yes, it is a t-shirt pattern. And the way to make that is, here's my fabric, and I'll put the coat down on it to show you what I have going here. Now, notice with this coat, and the fabric I had was a little bit wider than this, but notice with this coat, here would be the center front. So here's where the t-shirt goes, right here. Okay, there's the center front, and here's the opening. But using this t-shirt pattern, I simply cut extra over here. Oh, about 4 inches extra is what I cut, so there's a big overlap. The wind's going to blow. I want it to be a little bit warm. And this is how I cut it out. As far as what I have done here, I didn't even measure my arm for this. This was wide fabric, it's wool. I simply cut out to the edge of the fabric, and I thought if my arm is not this long, we can do something like folding up big cuffs, and that's exactly how it's worn, with the big cuffs on it, because my wrist is about here. This is a 1-layer coat. This is so simple. This is something you can make in a morning or an afternoon. It doesn't take any longer than that. And to make this 1-layer coat, what I have done is simply make seams on the shoulders, under the arms. Those are the only seams there are. I wanted a pocket in this. You could either put a patch pocket on top of it, or what I have done is add a patch pocket underneath. Here's the patch pocket that I've sewn under here. And I added this patch here, but then I had to have an opening to get my hand in. So that opening is simply the front of the front of the pattern, the front of the coat. The side seam's turned under about 5/8, and it's zigzagged in place, or serge the edge and straight stitch it down. And then I just stitched that other piece, top stitched it, that pocket piece underneath, and makes a nice pocket. How big the pocket is, put your hand down in some fabric and draw a line around it, however big it needs to be, so that you can comfortably put it inside. So all the seams are just plain old seams, and then I did want to finish them, so they're flat felled seams. I turned the raw edges over and top stitched them down again. Now you're going to have on this some buttons probably. You don't have to, I guess. You can just throw it on and have a wrap coat that way. You don't have to have it. But I decided I wanted some buttons on this? Well, through one layer of mohair, you can't very easily put that button and buttonhole. So what I have done under here is stitched a little extra piece of fabric. It's just stitched on by hand because I didn't want any stitches to show through the right side. So there's a little patch here, and there's probably a little piece of interfacing inside that patch so that it really reinforces it, and then the buttons are stitched on that. And all I have here is some yarn twisted to make loop buttonholes so that it'll button on. So a very simple coat. I also wanted this to come up around my head, if necessary, to cut out the winter winds. Well, look how easy this collar is. No pattern involved. It is simply a rectangle of fabric. When I hold it out straight, you can see it's just a rectangle of fabric. I rounded off these top edges, and that rectangle I made just the very same size as the neckline. You put your tape measure on end and measure what your new neckline is, because now it's bigger than the t-shirt was since I overlapped it. So you measure that raw edge of the neckline, you draw a rectangle of the same size, and I've just hemmed under all the raw edges here so I can either wear it open or wear it up around my neck. So makes a great, easy coat. Well, look through the fashion magazines and the pattern books and realize how many of the lovely, the elegant, the truly simple clothes begin with this t-shirt pattern. Look through the stores and analyze what they have done to make all those. Like the one I'm wearing, wouldn't you swear that set-in sleeves when I have my arm down? Except, of course, I already told you how I got this little pleat. So analyze all these things that you see and realize that I can do that. It's just a t-shirt. Design some innovations of your own. Well, when you think standard t-shirt, what are you going to wear with it? Jeans. Come along next time and we'll whip up a few things with denim.